Buzz Light, go ahead. Did you have a question? You've been unmuted.
I understand that the federal income tax is an excise tax. Do you understand that also?
Yes, I know what you're saying.
Okay, and as an excise tax, it's the exercise of a privilege. And so if one exercises a privilege, in this case, the federal income tax is a federal privilege. If you exercise a federal privilege, that could be a taxable activity. Those people that don't exercise a federal privilege is a non-taxable activity. What happens in a majority of the cases across the United States, it doesn't matter whether you're within a territory or not. You could even be in France and exercise a federal privilege, meaning a United States federal government privilege. And that could be a taxable activity. I'll give you a simple example. Let's take Boeing. If Boeing makes fighter jets for the federal government, that's a taxable activity. They're exercising federal privilege, and that's a taxable activity. But if they make airplanes or jets for the United Airlines, Delta Airlines, and such, that's they're not exercising a federal privilege, and that's a non-taxable activity. But they don't know it, and so they'll pay taxes on both. And what happens with the individual, like you and I, and the other people listening, when they're working and they get a W-2, or if they're doing work as a contractor and they get a 1099, you can read the very first page of a 1099 at the bottom. It says if you're in a trade or business. Well, a trade or business is defined in the Internal Revenue Code as the performance of the functions of a public office. Those are the words describing what a trade or business is. So if you think you're a carpenter and that fits you, most of the time it doesn't. And so the 1099, right on the 1099, you can it has a little box for correcting the 1099. And so you haven't received monies working for the federal government if you were just working for another private entity. If you were doing work for let's say you were a mason or a carpenter and doing work for the post office, you were exercising a federal privilege, and that would be a taxable activity. The person who gets a W-2 as an employee would have to rebut the so-called wages on the W-2. And the wages, it's a private sector employer, known as, well, we won't even use the word employer because that's defined in the Internal Revenue Service. Just as the word employee is defined in Title 26. But you can rebut the W-2 using a form that the Internal Revenue Service provides. It's called a 4852, if I remember it correctly. And then, therefore, your wages are really zero. And so that's what most people don't understand. The employer is giving you or telling the Internal Revenue Service, because they mail a W-3 to the Internal Revenue Service, which lists all the W-2 that they handed out at the beginning of the year, saying these people have worked for a federal entity, and the employer is not a federal entity. It's just a local mom and pop employer down the street. But they don't know, they're misapplying the law, and they don't know any different. But if they read the law, they would know the proper thing to do.
Okay, Adele, did you want to respond to that?
Well, I'm waiting for a question in there.
Well, I think he was just making a comment, right?
Yeah, just giving you my 2 cents.
Huh.
Okay. Well, a lot of what you said is right on, and if you understand the nature of these tax class 5 information returns, such as a W-4, W-2, 1099, 1098, they're all under gifts and estate taxes. And the key understanding is that it's a gift. And if you read 31 U.S.C. 321 D1, D2, you will see that the Treasury Department states that the federal income tax is a gift or bequest made payable to the United States, meaning the national government. So you're gifting your money to them. Now, we did not define the basic categories of U.S. taxpayers tonight in the discussion, number of which you alluded to. So if you are basically a resident alien, you're a taxpayer. If you are a statutory U.S. citizen, you're a taxpayer. If you are engaged in income from sources within the national government called the United States under 26 U.S.C. 861A, you will see very clearly that there's a full list of different types of things which they can claim that you're engaged in using their property. Now, personal services is one which is excluded for non-resident aliens if you're not engaged in a trade or business, the performance of the functions of a public office. So all of these things are true, but the other one would be non-resident aliens or American nationals who have made a voluntary election to submit to the national government and let them tax or treat their income as if they were a U.S. resident alien. So there's a lot of subsets of types of U.S. taxpayers, and I think that's what generally you were describing in here. But the tax class 5 information returns, they do not have any identifier as to who created it. They don't have any name of a party that was culpable in case of presumptions that were made that were false by the IRS. There is no signing of anything under penalties of perjury. So therefore, any American can use a W-2 corrected form, 1099 corrected, and send it to the IRS and have it all zeroed out. And that's a simple way of doing it. There's a gentleman in San Diego area that has a number of websites that are very prolific, and it would take you about 5 to 7 years to go through just everything that they have on it. It's huge. It's massive. And they even advocate doing some of this type of thing. But the simple, short version of what we're trying to say here is that with the revocation of election, the U.S. Congress allows you to leave the U.S. tax club if you get these tax class 5 information returns, and the employer who does not know the law, most of them have no foggy idea, and they look at you as a threat, then the answer is to make it as simple as possible, convert to a 1099, and do a correction, because they don't withhold anything. If you have a W-2, they withhold. And now how are you going to get that money back? Once the IRS has it and you're not filing, you're not going to see that money anymore. And so that's the logic behind using a 1099, is to, yes, you won't get the insurance, but you can pay for the insurance by never having to have any money withheld.
Well, I like your idea about the 1099. One other little point, when you said under penalties of perjury, most of the time, whenever you assign a jurat, it says penalty of perjury. But on the 1040, it says penalties. And the reason it says penalties is, one is you're perjuring yourself if you did intentionally lie on it. And the other, that was the one penalty. And the other penalty is that the form is really for a federal employee, and they can be dismissed from their job. That's their other penalty. That's why it says penalties.